Okay. For just a moment. There we go. Right, and we're live. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining City Sikhs live webinar. City Sikhs are holding a series of webinars and we thought it would be apt during Mental Health Awareness Week to offer advice to our community on how to cope with the ever-changing lockdown measures, tips to manage our mental health and some positive anecdotes to uplift you and illustrate the power of kindness. If you have any questions, there is a Q&A option just at the bottom of the screen and you could submit a written question. We'll try our best to get through them at the end of the panel. I am joined today by 4 wonderful panelists who have kindly given up their time to share their advice and experience with us. Thank you so much for contributing today. I'm really looking forward to showcasing the work that they do and we hope to offer some practical advice for you all during these incredibly testing times. I won't waste any more time, let's get into it. So let's go around the panel for introductions, starting with Sharanjit.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Sharanjit Singh and I'm the founder and director of Tarakki. And Tarakki is a not-for-profit that works with Punjabi communities to reshape approaches to mental health. Outside of Tarakki, I'm a master's student and I'm studying health policy management and evaluation over in Toronto.
Thank you. Neelam?
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, everybody. I hope everybody is well. I'm the founder of Sisters, which is an organisation working with the community around reproductive mental health and well-being. We focus on things like postnatal depression, prenatal depression, anxiety and chronic pain, and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Outside of Sisters, I'm currently working on a COVID project with the NHS and trying to supply much needed PPE across the UK. So hopefully we're going to get better with that.
Thank you, Neelam. Bhavandeep?
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Bhavandeep Singh. I'm a mental health practitioner, a social worker by profession. I'm part of the Seek Your Mind organisation. We're a charity. We help support, educate the Sikh community, Punjabi community around mental health and emotional well-being.
And Gurpreet?
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'm a GP and I've been a GP in Birmingham now for about 22 years. And I'm also a GP educator, so I train GPs.
Thank you, everyone. The lockdown and COVID-19 pandemic has been difficult for most of us. I think that this event is vital at a time like this, particularly when we're hearing that BAME communities are disproportionately at risk of dying from coronavirus. This information is unsettling, and whilst the research is in its early stages, this issue is causing a lot of upset in our communities, and rightly so. It is incredibly important that we do all we can to stay safe and protect our mental health and well-being. One of the things that I found most difficult during the lockdown is being separated from my family. I found this incredibly hard on Vaisakhi in particular. This is something that I always celebrate with my family, and I know that many will have found Vaisakhi difficult this year, especially as we could not visit the Gurdwara due to restrictions. But I hope we all managed to find a way to mark the occasion nonetheless. Sikhi and my faith has helped me considerably during this time. I would now like to move to the panel to start our questions. What have you found the most difficult during the lockdown and the COVID-19 pandemic? Starting with Sharanjit, please.
So for me, I have actually gone from living on my own all year to now being back at home with all of my family. So going from living with just me to having 6 people in the house. And I guess for me, that massive shake-up of routine has been so difficult at points to transition into. I have had to really seek out space in a way that I wasn't seeking out space before, and almost make a completely new routine that doesn't just focus on me, but also looks at how I can support my family who are immediately around me. And it's something that's really important to me and how I support my family around me, but it can be really tired and really exhausting sometimes. And so that's been almost like a double-edged sword in the sense that it's been something that's great, but it's also been particularly difficult.
Thank you. Neelam.
So I'm actually completely the opposite to Sharon in that I live alone. My family are all in Huddersfield. So I've had the opposite. I can go back home on a weekend. I can see my partner. I've not been able to do any of that. My partner's in the vulnerable category, so we can't see each other, and as are my parents. So this has been a real test for me to sort of almost make that sacrifice, and not seeing people in this time, and recognizing it's actually for the greater good, and it's actually for the well-being of those people that I love around me. And learning to be able to be supportive from a distance has been really challenging, because our first instinct, especially when someone's hurting, they're upset, is actually to reach out physically, to hug someone, to touch someone. And I've actually found that really difficult. Whilst I've lived alone for 13 years, I've never actually been alone. I've always been able to come and go as I've pleased. This has been a completely isolating experience for me, on top of sort of having to deal with sort of the remit of sisters, and recognizing that I'm not the only one in this space. So really trying to manage my own feelings and managing feelings from a distance as well.
Thank you, Neelam. It's so true. It's the complete opposite of your instinct, which is to go to people and seek comfort in them. Pavandeep.
Yeah, so for me, some similarities, I suppose, with Neelam. I live by myself as well, it's circumstantial, and have been doing for quite some time now. But I think having this added layer of being forced to isolate yourself from other people has been quite challenging. And it's made me really reflect and think about those people out there, the elders, or people out there that are by themselves, those who are vulnerable, and how they must feel day in, day out. And I think what's been really interesting for me is when I've heard like other parents or other people talk about how their husbands or their wives are getting on their nerves, or their children, and they're really struggling with that. For me, it's like I'm looking at it from a very different perspective. So coming from a totally different angle, feeling very isolated. I know that obviously I'm making links with family members and friends through media, like telephone calls and so on. But it's a very different experience to when you're forced into something rather than having that choice. It's like almost have the freedom taken out of your hands. I think another thing for me is being away from Sangat, not being able to just go to the Gurdwara, local Gurdwara. There's Gurdwara everywhere all over the UK. Knowing that you just can't pop into the Gurdwara, even though we believe that Maharaj is everywhere around us all the time. We don't need to go to a specific place, so to speak. But sometimes you just want to go into that environment just to be away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. So having that privilege taken away, once again, has been something for me to like ponder and reflect on, to be honest. Yeah.
Thank you, Pavandeep. Gurpreet.
Similar themes. I'm very, very fortunate in that my 3 grown-up children are at home at the moment, one from university, one working, and one has been allowed to come and work at home. So from that point of view, I'm very conscious that I'm blessed to have their company and not in a situation where I'm having to worry about them. I have found it difficult not seeing my mum, who's very elderly now. Again, blessed that she's living with my brother, so we can communicate on Zoom, and again, missing my sister as well. One of the other things that I found a bit difficult at the moment is getting to grasp with an infection that on one level is harmless for some people and devastating for others. And one of the blessings I have is having a purpose and being able to go to work as a GP. But it's quite difficult in the workplace to work with your colleagues, but have to maintain a distance and still be working very closely together. And it just feels incongruous. It doesn't fit with what you would expect.
Thank you, Gurpreet. Yeah, no, I can't imagine how difficult that must be. Adds another level of how strange everything is at the moment. What have you and your organisation been doing to support the community during the COVID-19 lockdown? And I know we've kind of touched on this, but if you care to elaborate, Sharanjeet.
So across lockdown, obviously, before lockdown, we used to have in-person discussions, open groups, open forums for Punjabi men, Punjabi women, and Punjabi LGBTQ plus folks in London and in Birmingham and also in Brampton in Canada. But of course, now we've had to move a lot of our work onto social media. And so one of the ways we've been engaging with people has been through quarantine question and answer sessions, where we've had one of our volunteers, Dr. Kuljit Bogle, who has had discussions with people coming from different perspectives in relation to COVID. All of those are available on our social media. And we've also done some skill development. So people doing guided meditations, someone who does origami classes, and just things that are very low resource and things that we can do that don't require too much investment. And one last thing has also been just having moments where we've been able to kind of escape from everything that's happening. And this has taken the form of DJ sets. One of my friends who's a house DJ did a DJ set for us. And also one of my other friends who does kind of South Asian classical singing. He has been doing some kind of classical singing on our social media as well. And it's just acknowledging that we all have a lot of different skills at this point that we can kind of contribute in different ways. And so we're just trying to put things together to try and, you know, do our part within the kind of COVID lockdown experience.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Sharanjit. Neelam.
So ours has been really interesting. So obviously, not only do we deal with mental health as an organisation, we deal with the reproductive health issues. We've had a lot of people being really worried that their smear tests are being cancelled, their examinations relating to endometriosis or PCOS, and them face-to-face GP appointments are all getting cancelled. What do you do in that circumstance? How do you access some of that information you need from a GP? So we've been working with sort of a pool of GPs to answer some of these questions, some of the common questions that people go to their GP around reproductive health. So whether it's relating to heavy bleeding or not, why are the smear tests being cancelled? When are they looking to be rearranged? What sort of problems should you be worried about? When should you be pushing for it? So these are the things we've been tackling quickly because they've been very important to us. And we've been working with other organisations such as the Eve Appeal to sort of really highlight this particular issue with smear testing, because it's a prevalent issue within BME communities generally. So we didn't want it to fall under the net further because of COVID. So we really wanted to still highlight the point that rather than just ignore it because it's COVID, we still need to be on top of this. We still need to understand what smear test is, etc. So getting that information to the community. And obviously, similar to Sharon, we've had to move everything we do in person to online. And we found it very hit and miss because a lot of our community aren't people that want to access things online. They're not very social media savvy. They don't want to be either. They like that in-person contact. A lot of our sessions there's a lot of tears, a lot of laughter, and it's a range of emotions, and it's very difficult to do that online. So we've really had some challenges around that. So whilst we've had sort of online platforms, it's never been quite the same as being able to be in person. So really, we've really struggled with that, in all honesty, because people need that social interaction with some of these conditions and knowing that they're not on their own. We have noticed a spike in we have a private group on Facebook, so relating to anything reproductive related. And we've noticed more and more women actually talking out about their problems, which we never really had before. We had to really prompt conversations. And we found that people are actually wanting to sort of claim that narrative back for themselves and use COVID as an opportunity to sort of get rid of some of the stigmas relating to reproductive well-being. So we've had people talking out about postnatal depression, which has been really hard for us in the past, to find someone, whether it be someone from the Sikh community or a woman of colour, or we found people talking about PMDD openly, and which we've never seen before. So we think that this all relates to there's a space for it now, and online platforms are a little bit easier to speak about your journey without being in front of people. So it's had a two-prong approach, really. It's been hard in some ways, but it's been really worked well for us in others. So we just want to continue working with people to get that support in there for them.
Of interest, after the lockdown restrictions are lifted, are you kind of already thinking about what elements of the online activity that you're already doing you're going to keep? As you're saying, it's kind of both ways.
I think we'll keep the majority of it. Obviously, alongside government guidance and everything, that will move some of the things back to in-person meetings. But there's been a lot to be said for online, and we've been really fortunate. We're working with the University of Birmingham on a webinar series, but rather than the experts talking about it, we're going to be working with members of the community to provide this information. So we wanted to empower those other people to talk about it rather than it just being from an academic or a clinical perspective. So I think we're going to keep a lot of that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Neelam. Pavandeep.
Yeah, so at Seeking Mind, we've been involved in a range of initiatives, really. We're offering more telephone consultations to people out there who might be struggling with COVID-19 or related mental health difficulties, what it's bringing up for them. We're doing more posts on Instagram, more stories about shared care, understanding, working and trying to make sense of the uncertainty and uncertain times. We've done some YouTube videos, some in Punjabi as well, to reach out to other community members who might not, be au fait with understanding or having that level of understanding of English. So we're kind of focused upon strategies like mindfulness and breathing activities and exercises that they can engage in to help with their feelings at this current time. We've got some team members that are going to be taking part in the course camp, virtual course camp, to discuss COVID-19 related struggles as well as mental health difficulties. We've also got, we did a Twitter post which kind of looked at the link between COVID-19 and Sikhi and how they kind of fit together and the comparisons there and understanding around that. And we've got a team member that's also involved with the Every Mind Matters campaign by focusing specifically on the BAME community and the impact, and they've been kind of been involved in lots of different media platforms, sharing information, whether it's on the radio or on TV. And finally, we've also got somebody in the team that's going to be doing some research once things have calmed down around COVID-19 in conjunction with the Sikh Council UK around the impact of COVID-19 on Gurdwara, how they've managed and learning outcomes.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Pavandeep. Gurpreet.
So from an organisational point of view, from general practice point of view, I think perhaps the most important message is that general practice is open and there and available for patients. So in the early days of COVID, when it hit Europe and hit London, general practice in London and hospitals rapidly became overwhelmed. So it's probably just useful to explain how we changed what we did in the Midlands. So certainly in Birmingham, we've set ourselves up as green, red, amber and purple sites. Now what that means is we had to stop the situation of patients walking into the surgery and it being a central area for rapid spread of infection between patients. And staff getting infected and infected staff infecting patients. So the first thing that was done was the doors were shut and we moved everything to online or telephone consultations, so predominantly telephone. And we set up red sites where patients who had COVID would be assessed, amber sites where we can physically examine patients who don't have COVID symptoms but need a doctor to examine them. And then purple sites where routine work like immunisations would continue in relevance to sexual health and reproductive health. That is continuing, but in a different way. So things like implants aren't happening, but some aspects of that care is still being done. It was in order to minimise contact between patients and staff as well. And then we have green sites, which is what most practices are, where the doctor spends the day talking to patients on the telephone, going through their problems. And general practice has moved light years in the last couple of weeks, so that the software has rapidly been updated. And we're now able, during a consultation, to ask patients who have smartphones, and in the case of the elderly, sometimes their children are coming and helping them do it, so that we send them a link which they click on, which allows us to have a video consultation. And that's allowing us to look at a lot of the problems that patients are suffering from at the same time. So it's been a massive change, but the important point is patients can still access care through general practice, and we're then doing our best to protect patients from COVID, but also access secondary care help at minimal risk, because the hospitals are only just beginning to set up services again for non-COVID patients. One of the things as a group of doctors we've also done is one of my colleagues, Dr. Dilsha Singh, has produced a video explaining COVID to patients in Punjabi so that they understand all the measures that they need to take.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Gurpreet, and thank you for confirming as well something so simple, that GPs are open. At the beginning, when there was so much panic, people weren't sure really what services can they access. They didn't want to burden services by incorrectly going to the wrong place. So I hope that's alleviated a lot of other people's worries as well. Many people are struggling with their mental health at the moment. The pandemic is exacerbating feelings of isolation, depression, and anxiety, amongst other things. What one piece of advice would you give to someone who is feeling this way? It doesn't have to be one piece of advice, just what advice would you give? I'm sure you can't whittle it down to one. Sharanjeet, if you'd like to start.
So for me, I can only speak to the things that have helped me kind of manage my challenges during the COVID lockdown period. And I guess for me, it is the ability to have a space to yourself and a space to reflect. So every morning I try and go on a walk for like 45 minutes or so, but I know that's, I'm lucky to live in an area where I can do that. And also managing how much I'm engaging with the news, which can often be quite overwhelming. And, lastly, looking at how I can spend time, with my family in a way where we are kind of growing together and we're able to talk to each other about our difficulties, because I'm very lucky in that sense to be able to have these discussions with my family, and I found that really useful. But I know not everyone's that lucky, but that's what has worked for me at this point.
Thank you. Neelam?
I think for me, I've created more boundaries. So as much as I'm not seeing anyone because I live alone, obviously I'm getting a lot of phone calls, and I've got a lot of family members calling, I've got a lot of friends calling because they're concerned. But when I've gone to work or I've done some work for sisters, I sometimes need some space to myself. So similar to what Sharanjeet was saying about creating a bit of a space for yourself, it's so important that if I don't speak to a family member or my parents or my partner or my friends every single day, phone call after phone call, that's okay. And I know that people are worried about me, but I've got to also be mindful of my own health, because constantly being on the phone and sort of saying, yes, my day was like this, and it's a really repetitive day most of the time. We're not going anywhere, we're not doing anything exciting. So apart from doing the same sort of walks, I'm not doing anything or going anywhere. And I think it's okay to have to create those boundaries. It sometimes can get overwhelming when everybody is checking in all the time. So I've been very mindful of having my own boundaries around that as well, which has been really, really helpful for me.
Thank you, Neelam. I can relate to that so much, where you feel like you should be connecting with everyone virtually, but actually you just don't want to. And I have nothing to add on our last conversation because I haven't been anywhere apart from my daily walk or something. So thank you for that. Bhavandeep.
Okay, yeah. So for me, I suppose I acknowledge the fact that for some people, breathing exercises or exercise or managing the anxiety, whether it's through mindfulness, that might be helpful. But if I come on to my own personal perspective, I suppose this situation's for me is a classic example of a situation wherein we're really faced with a situation where you're asking, is this within or outside of our control? And for me, from a Sikhi perspective, I think I'm taking it back for me, reflecting on the fact that we talk about accepting God's will. Fine, we talk about God's divine will and how we live amongst that. And I think I find this, and not in a judgmental way, but a lot of people, especially those practicing Sikhi, use all the right buzzwords and use all the correct terminology about accepting God's will. But ultimately, this is like the real test. So it's like a question of actually, we can talk the talk, but can we walk the walk? And now that we're faced with a situation where it is outside of our hands, how are we managing that? So some of the conversations for me around me, I've been saying to people, reminding them that we're in this together. You're not alone. We are in this collectively. But then also having the faith and foresight that this is going to pass. It's not going to be here forever. This time that we're going through this pandemic. And I think so for me, it's about knowing where you can make a change and what you can do to help yourself, but equally reaching out for support. So if things are getting overwhelming for you and you're really struggling, then being able and confident enough to actually say, you know what, this is really difficult for me right now. I just need some space to kind of like talk about how I'm feeling and what I can do about this situation. But yeah, I think the key thing for me is acceptance. Gurbani says, "Bana manne so sukh bane vich sukh painda." So ultimately, what we're saying is, if you can accept God's will, through accepting God's will, you'll come to peace, accepting and having a sense of peace. I understand that might not work for everybody, that analogy, because it's like having to put a lot of faith into the unknown. But I can talk about it from my own perspective. Yeah, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. Thank you, Bobby. Gurpreet.
So I'm going to answer that from a GP point of view. And the first piece of advice I would give is you're not alone. We're having phone calls every day from lots and lots and lots of people who are suffering from anxiety caused by COVID, and it may exacerbate pre-existing anxiety that they had. And I'd say that there's no one method to stay well, and not one method is necessarily right for everybody. So I'm just going to briefly go through some of the things that may help. So if someone is having really disabling anxiety, then do speak to your GP. That's what we're here for. What we can help with is, if someone is suffering from depression, we'll assess them and guide them and work jointly with them to talk about medication for depression. For anxiety, we have very limited tools in terms of medication. Some of our antidepressants do have an anti-anxiety effect, but that's only one aspect. The other aspect are the things that the patient and people can do for themselves. So there are lots of resources available on a lot of mental health charity websites and on our local mental health sites. So in Birmingham, for example, the over 25s can access a website called Birmingham Healthy Minds, and the under 25s, an organisation called Forward Thinking Birmingham. And those are the mental health services within Birmingham where you can go onto their site and make contact with a psychiatric nurse who can support you and give you help during this time. They also have lots of useful tips and resources on their websites. And all of these resources, somebody asked the question, we'll be posting afterwards. Harjeet will make sure that you have access to those. Charities like the Mental Health Foundation also have lots of tips. So we know that if you make contact with friends, remotely via telephone, video, that can help keep you well. Contact with family. In addition, there are other treatments that the mental health services can offer in terms of things called cognitive behavioural therapy, which are basically talking therapies to help patients change their perspective and how they think about things. So it's, in a sense, changing your internal dialogue, your internal language about how you're perceiving the current situation. And that moves on to something else, which is all of us can stop and have little gratitudes every day. So things that we can stop and say, actually, there are lots of terrible things happening, but there are these things that I'm grateful for. So although it's a devastating time for many people economically and financially and health-wise, it's actually a moment where we can just pause and stop and think, what are we doing to this planet? What are we doing to our own health? Having time to slow down and not rush around all the time, and quality time with family or friends when you're talking to them. So just stopping and pausing to think about the things that we can be grateful for. And then other things that can, and we know, help enormously with people's mental health are regular exercise, because it releases chemicals in your brain that help boost your mood. So although people are frightened, and lots of patients have said they haven't left the house for 6 weeks, I'd be saying, go in your garden if you have a garden, go for a walk, and don't be afraid. If you're worried about socially distancing, there are hundreds of exercise videos that you can do at home on your computer, if you have access to one. Things like yoga and mindfulness are also ways of calming your thoughts and your breathing. And of course, in all of that, people will be at different places, but your faith can be enormously helpful too. You can use it in conjunction with all the others. And one of the things personally that I found helpful is a group of us are having Zoom BART meetings where we're reading Gurbani together. So there are lots of different things that can help different people, but actually in terms of mental health, using a combination or lots of these things and using the ones that work for you are probably the best way forward.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for your contributions there. I feel like we've got a really well-rounded response from every angle. As we all know, it is Mental Health Awareness Week this week, and the theme this year is kindness. So one of the things that really struck me during the lockdown at the start was how quickly communities organised and created mutual aid groups, and they were just popping up all over the place to help vulnerable and infected people in their area, from getting them shopping and just checking in, and those who are, in the vulnerable groups and isolated, just, touching base with them. And they just seem to have popped up so organically and out of nowhere, and it just really made me feel warm at a time where there wasn't much to feel positive about. What I really hope, it's been a beautiful thing to be a part of and witness, and I hope that we'll be able to harness this goodwill and community spirit once the lockdown ends as well. I'd like to ask the panelists, could you please tell me about an act of kindness that you have seen, experienced, or done yourself during the lockdown, starting with Sharanjit, please.
So I agree that, when we look around and we see so much, difficulty that people are experiencing, difficulty and, lack of action, whether it's from a government or healthcare perspective. For me, one of the main things that has stood out in terms of kindness has been how the elderly population on my street have been coming together. That is safely socially distancing coming together. I think every day around 4 p.m, a group of 3 or 4 auntia come out and, basically sit like 5-10 meters away from each other and just have a catch up and have a chat. And my mum is, one of the people who goes out and tries to coordinate this. And, from what my mum said, it's really been a really small but important part of their day, especially for groups of people who otherwise will spend 95% of their time at the Gurdwara. And with this lack of sangat that they might be experiencing right now, it's nice to try and bring that same sensation into their daily routine during lockdown. And I'm super proud of all of them, and super proud of my mum for taking the initiative and doing this. And it kind of really shows me that everyone is stepping up in different ways, and these are different ways that we might not necessarily see all the time.
Thank you. She sounds like an amazing lady, Sharanjit. Neelam.
Sharanji, that story's really made my day. Honestly, it has. I'm really, really glad you shared that. I think for us, it's we've had an impouring of so much support. One of our campaigns is around period poverty. So obviously the schools are closed, so our products aren't going to be going there. But what we've done is shifted our focus into other community groups that are doing lots of work around this area. And so we've had loads of donations come through, but we've actually used the opportunity to actually support all the other food banks, and actually not just getting menstrual products, but getting hygiene related products as well, so we can sort of get some of that to those vulnerable communities. And we've just had so I gave one of our team my address. I don't often give that out because she said that she had quite a lot for me. She had a box full. What she did have for me was almost like a pallet full of just period products, and it filled up my spare room. So, and they got then shipped out to another organization, which was great, because actually it wasn't about just us servicing the community where we can. We wanted to work with other people that were working in this space to help them. So that was an incredible act of kindness for us. And someone actually gave us money towards actually putting chocolates in the period products. So like when somebody's, as most people know, as when you're having a menstrual cycle, what do you want? You want chocolate. So that was a really nice little touch as well. So we thought that was really nice, and it brought that humanity back again. So that was really lovely for us to see.
That's lovely. Thank you, Neelam. Pavandeep?
Okay, so my example is going to start off with being on the receiving end of kindness. So when the lockdown was in its early stages, most of you probably will be aware, a lot of the supermarkets were like rewarding key workers with like bunches of flowers and various other items and gestures. So I was in a situation where I went to a local supermarket, purchased my shopping, and as I was leaving, I was presented with a bunch of flowers. And I kind of taken aback really, because on one hand I was thinking, oh gosh, as a male getting flowers, there's something around that initial thoughts. And then I was thinking, actually, am I deserving of these flowers? Because I'm not a key frontline worker. So yes, I'm a key worker, and I've still been coming to work throughout this time. But in terms of, I started thinking about those nurses and doctors and other health professionals that are dealing with patients like face on really in hospital settings and so on and so forth. So I accepted the flowers, but then decided I was going to pay it forward. So what I did was I delivered them to somebody else who I knew would appreciate them, to cheer them up. And I thought that might be the right thing to do. But then I suppose as I went home, it got me thinking about some other issues at a deeper level really. I suppose for many years practicing Sikhi, being on this path, we're kind of accustomed to doing things for others, and we look at kindness as an act towards others. It's something that's external. But then it got me thinking about, how do we cultivate kindness within ourselves? What does that look like? What does that mean? And I started to think about the fact that actually, when we talk about Srabat Bapala, we talk about that from the perspective of everybody, and we are part of that as well. That includes us too. So it got me thinking about how we should be kind towards ourselves, what that looks like, how does that manifest? So for example, taking small steps on a day-to-day basis to do things which make us happy. And I thought, actually, this is important, because too often we can be quite critical of ourselves and, think about, actually, I'm not good at this, I can't achieve that. So I thought, I'm going to try something which I haven't done for a long time, or something new. And I started doing baking, which is so unlike me, but I did it. And I thought, actually, I'm not going to be critical about the end product. It's the fact that I took part in it. So that was, I think, for me, a bit of like a learning experience of how we can start being kind towards ourselves and stop being so judgmental and critical about what we do.
Thank you, Pavandeep. I mean, I think you've touched on a few things there, but in particular, being kind to yourself. I think we all... Oh, Gurpreet, could you just move your mic? Sorry, I can hear myself. In terms of kindness, you forget to be kind to yourself, and when you're spending so much time by yourself, even if you have got 6 other people living in the house with you, it's a lot of time for reflection and introspection. And so generally we go to a place of being critical, as opposed to thinking of what can we do with our time that is actually for myself. And it can be anything from baking. Cooking can be so therapeutic. It's something that I enjoy doing as well. But I really think, Pavandeep, you do deserve the flowers. And next time you keep them, you absolutely should keep them. All men should have flowers. We all deserve flowers. Thank you for sharing. Gurpreet.
There are a couple of acts of kindness that struck me. One was a neighbour, an elderly English neighbour who I rang on one occasion and just asked, if you need any shopping, let us know. But what struck me was the new neighbour, an Indian gentleman, I found out later had actually gone across the road, knocked on the door, stood back and asked what was required, gone and got it, and then refused payment for it. So he'd actually done rather than just offered and said. So that sort of hit home a bit. And the other thing that really struck me was one day I came into surgery and I had a piece of paper with a rainbow that had been coloured in by a child to say thank you to the NHS. And then the gratitude that patients express when we speak to them. So those are things that have been quite touching.
Thank you, Gurpreet. Yeah, the rainbows that have been popping up everywhere are lovely. We need more rainbows. I hope they stick around way past the lockdown is lifted. So following on from these wonderful examples from the panelists, I think it is important to focus on the positive things that we can identify in our day-to-day lives. The Clap for Carers every Thursday at 8 p.m. I personally find it wonderful. It's great seeing your neighbours briefly once a week to show appreciation for our key workers who are putting their lives on the line for us all. And also it kind of creates opportunities to talk to your neighbours who you otherwise may not have spoken to, may not have had time to speak to. And it's just another positive thing to take away and something I highly recommend you do if you haven't already. So now we're going to move on to our Q&A session. So some of you have submitted some questions during the session, which is great, and I've had some already submitted before today. So we're going to start with, we received a question regarding procrastination and the overwhelming feeling that you must be productive and achieve all of your goals before the lockdown ends. I am guilty of putting this pressure on myself too. Could you please say a few words for those of us who are doing this? I'd like to direct this question to Shodanjit, please.
So when lockdown started, I had the choice of kind of staying in Toronto or coming back to Birmingham. And I chose to come back to Birmingham, and I still had a load of uni work to do. And so all of my uni work went online, and I've also got my thesis to do. And for me, that transition from my uni coursework to my thesis has been really difficult because I've been procrastinating so much. And about a week ago, I was feeling really bad for the lack of progress that I'd made on this. And then, I started thinking about, why am I trying to tie my worth to how much I'm producing at this point, especially when there is so much going on and there's so much that we wouldn't normally consider normal happening around us. And we're really all in a situation where we're experiencing varying levels of difficulties, and some of us experiencing varying levels of trauma as well. And that has a huge impact on, the body, the mind, and how we function in our day-to-day lives. And so for me, I am definitely still trying to understand how I relate to my kind of work during lockdown, because I still feel bad for procrastinating sometimes, but I'm trying to be kind to myself, as Faji and Benji mentioned earlier, and just trying to think, okay, if I'm not able to get this work done today, let's look at my diary and see where I can put it in for later in the week. I think one of the best conversations I had last week was with my thesis supervisor, and my thesis supervisor said to me, all right, let's put a little mini deadline in for a couple of weeks from now. And that was different to me giving myself a deadline, because I feel accountable to my thesis supervisor. And since that discussion, I've been kind of doing the work in a way that it's still not like really, really quick, but it's getting there. And I'm feeling better after doing short amounts of work. So I guess for me, having the accountability has really helped, but then also being kind to myself, and thinking that things will happen and things will get done. It's a matter of time. And we're often pressured in our society to get things done quickly. And I feel that now is a time greater than ever to take a step back, take a breath if we can, and think about how we can do things more conscientiously, and not pressure ourselves into feeling that we need to really push in a short amount of time.
Thank you, Shodanjit. I completely agree. My sister actually had some deadlines due, and I think I really do feel for everybody whose schooling and uni just kind of stopped midway. You know, some people didn't get to finish, or they're graduating under lockdown and things like that. And I just think it's very important to be kind to yourself and set very small, achievable goals. And I think that's really great that your thesis kind of advisor did that, because it's just so much better when it comes from somewhere else and you're not imposing it on yourself. Our next question is I'm going to kind of combine them together. So do you have any tips or guidance as to how to support a family member who suffers from a mental health condition? Another question that we received was kind of around the fact that people are living in intergenerational houses, and that there are some of the older generation who don't understand either mental health or how to speak about it, or what to do if they can see that somebody's suffering with any mental health problems. So I would like to direct this firstly to Gurpreet. Thank you.
So it can be very difficult if you're in a household with someone who's suffering from mental health problems. And probably the first step forward is openness and honesty, talking about it in a non-judgmental and calm way, avoiding finding solutions for that individual, because your method may not be right for them. Also encouraging them to engage and get help if that's what's needed. That's much easier from a GP and from a mental health worker's point of view if it's the patient who makes contact with us. But in cases where you're really seriously concerned about someone's mental health, you can still talk to your GP. But as I said, it's much easier if it's the patient who comes forward. The other thing is to be kind to yourself in all of this. So carers and people looking after people with mental health problems in the family can suffer enormously themselves. And it requires a certain amount of acceptance that you don't have ultimate power and control in changing what's happening. So sometimes you may have to step back yourself and self-care too, but guiding that person towards help is really important, and keeping emotions down and energy levels down so that it doesn't become heated and a dangerous or very stressful situation for the individual.
Thank you, Gurpreet. I'd also like to ask Pavandeep to answer that question, please.
Yeah, so I think it's an extension of what Benji's already said, really, validating the other person's experience, because I think it's very easy, especially in like Punjabi households or Sikh households, to like minimize and trying to like, say it's not a big deal, you'll get over it. So I think it's important to validate. And I think something which Benji mentioned, which is really important, like secondary trauma, about the impact it can have on you if you are a family member of that individual who's got the mental health difficulty. So I think it's about being like open, honest, transparent, listening to what your family member is saying to you about the difficulty, and then supporting them with the process of accessing help, because sometimes it's easier for yourself, being that's one bit removed, to try and encourage them, to see the GP, for example, or trying to reach out. There's so many organisations now out there that support mental health and generally emotional well-being, not just Sikh Mind, but there's many out there that do this kind of work and support, like the Sikh and Punjabi community. But I think it's really important to be able to be honest, and I think, like you mentioned, sometimes people kind of inevitably go into that kind of trying to problem solve the situation. They want to seek a solution and trying to fix the problem. But what we find in our work as well, is that unfortunately that's not really helpful. At that time, the person needs you to show their compassion, understanding, and to be more of a scaffolder, like supporter, really support the process rather than trying to rescue them. So being there with them, holding them in mind and helping them to kind of get the right support. And I think we've seen as well, especially within Seeking Mind and through the work that we do in our own professions as well, that sometimes if difficulties around mental health are not addressed in a timely manner, it can have a detrimental impact further on down the line. So we do really encourage people, if somebody's put the confidence in you and to talk about what they're going through, then please don't ignore that. Please act upon it and get professional advice and seek support with them, for them, and do it together.
Thank you, Babandeep. Just to let the audience know that we will be posting the links and signposting to all the services that we've mentioned today on the City Sikhs Twitter, so keep an eye out for those. Babandeep, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we've had a comment that within our communities we are always told it's life and to get on with it. However, there are so many people who are not tapping into support. How can we get to the hard to reach community? And Sharanjit, I'll be coming to you for this one as well. Thanks, Babandeep.
So, so some of the work that we Seeking Mind do, we do go into like Gurdwara and places, you know, I think there's a few things really. One is about generally raising the awareness of mental health and what that actually means. I think the comment is actually right in terms of what's being said. There is like a perspective out there that you just get on with it, get over it, it's not really a big deal. But the reality is, it doesn't matter what colour or creed you're from, whether you're male or female or what you ascribe to, mental health, we all have mental health, and we can all have mental health difficulties just like with physical health. So I think it's about raising the platform, you know, breaking down the barriers. So obviously some of the other work that other organisations like Duraki do, for example, you know, having more forums, more discussions, you know, some of the things that we're encouraging as well, having information available in different mediums, in different languages, to try and kind of, I suppose, there's something about educating people out there, the Sangha, the community, about mental health and what that means and mental health difficulties. But then there's something about accessing and reaching, getting support. I think it's kind of like working in conjunction with one another as well. And I think the reality is, I've said this many times before, that it's like an uphill battle. By that, what I mean is, it is, you know, we are making progress, but it's small steps. And I think small steps is better than nothing at all. You know, once we can start getting mental health on the agenda and getting other people out there to understand, irrespective of what generation they're from, that this is a real issue. It's not, you know, something we shouldn't just brush under the carpet. That's the only way we can kind of like, you know, represent this in our community and start tackling it and helping people. Because as people out there will know, the BAME community and men in general, there's high statistics around suicide, you know, for people, young people that are suffering and, you know, with difficulties around the mental health. So it is really, really important. It is on the agenda, and we're always looking as a team at new ways and new initiatives to kind of reach out there to the community and look at how best we can do that, you know, whether it's in Punjabi or other material, or where we need to go really in terms of which settings we need to go to far and wide to talk about this more openly.
Thank you, Babandeep. Sharanjit, do you have anything to add?
So I think from our perspective, I find it, personally, I don't believe that communities can be hard to reach. I feel that we aren't necessarily looking to understand the varied experiences of how people engage with each other in particular communities. So as Baji said, a lot of organizations that deal with Punjabi and Sikh mental health have been targeting and working with a variety of different community stakeholders. I think we all know that Gurdwara are a really important stakeholder within Sikh communities. And we've worked with several Gurdwara over the last couple of years to try and work with them to develop their mental health infrastructure. And what we found is that there are a lot of things that we do really, really well already. And really, we're trying to focus on what these strengths are so we can use and bolster these strengths and really look at how well our community can do, because there is so much potential. And I never like feeling as though there's a deficit in what we have, or we need to create huge amounts of new infrastructure, because we've been given and we've been blessed with so much amazing infrastructure. And so it is small steps towards progress. It is small steps moving forward, but I firmly believe that every single one of us hold a different piece of the jigsaw puzzle. If we're focused on one corner of the jigsaw puzzle, we won't be able to see the whole thing broadly, because we all play a different role, and we all have a role not just within organizations but within our daily lives to really change how we perceive mental health and how we approach mental health within Punjabi communities, Sikh communities and beyond.
Thank you, thank you so much, Sharanjit. I'm going to try and quickly, I'm just mindful of the time, get through a couple more questions. This one is for Neelam. COVID-19 has unfortunately affected the BAME community adversely, and we've seen a high percentage of deaths. Do you address this among your members, and how more around kind of what you're doing around COVID-19 as opposed to the deaths through the work that you're doing at Sisters, please?
So this is interesting because Sisters doesn't exclusively work with just the Sikh community or the BME community. We've used this as an opportunity to talk to our wider members about sort of the inequalities in healthcare, the inequalities from socioeconomic backgrounds. And we've really used it as an opportunity to sort of highlight these barriers for other minority groups, so that actually we really get more advocacy out of the groups itself. It almost empowers that person and puts a fire in their belly, because we don't want this to happen. We don't want these extra barriers. So it was a really good learning opportunity for people in the group as well. Interestingly, we were part of a call today with Public Health England around this particular topic. And we were giving sort of our feedback and some of our members' feedback in terms of, obviously we're dealing with people that have underlying health conditions, so not just mental health conditions, and how they're treated in relation to that access to healthcare, how they're treated as BME women sometimes. So we're using this as a real opportunity now to shape some of these conversations and actually get a voice at the table, because that's been so important for us as an organisation, to have a seat at the table and actually talk to people like Public Health England, who are going to be leading independent inquiries, to say, this is what we've been talking about for the past 5 years, and it's really important that we've got the space now. It's horrible that it's happened in the way that it has, but we really need to be able to talk about this and put a seat at the table and actually claim that narrative back.
Thank you, Neelam. I absolutely agree. I think one of the things that we can all see from the pandemic is that, and how it's affecting our communities, that we can't be ignored anymore. And now is a time to be engaged, continue to be engaged, don't let this slip. Our voices are more important than ever, and we need to use these platforms now and keep up the momentum. The next question that we have is for Gurpreet, from a student counsellor who works in a school. And they're wondering, how can I best support young people and adults in a way that respects the individual? Thank you, Gurpreet.
So a student counsellor can be a listening ear for young people. So just being supportive by listening to what their concerns are is probably the best way to support. And where they're concerned that there may be deeper underlying issues, then signposting those young people to the services and resources that are appropriate to help them.
Thank you, Gurpreet. I'm afraid we are out of time. We've had a few more questions. I'm really sorry we didn't have time to get through those. I hope you've seen from today, from our discussion, that if you're struggling, you're not alone, and we really are all in this together. It's really important that you speak about how you're feeling, and if someone has felt brave enough to disclose something to you and express this, it's not always clear how best to support them, but it is vital that you first listen to them and acknowledge how they are feeling and that this is normal. And secondly, please signpost to the appropriate services. There are a lot of online and phone services that are equipped to support you. City Sikhs will be sharing this information on their social media for you to take a look at in your own time. A lot of materials from our panelists who have kindly contributed today. Please look out for one another, check in on your loved ones virtually or by phone, and share how you're feeling too. I want to say a huge, huge thank you to our 4 wonderful panelists for their time and experience. I've learned so much today, and I hope that what we've discussed today will be helpful to you too. So thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to you for tuning in today. From City Sikhs, please stay safe and healthy, and we wish you peace. Thank you.